Hello again, my loves. Tonight's story follows Poppy, who woke up in a hospital bed with 14 months missing out of her own life, and Elspeth, the cold beekeeper standing at the end of that bed, telling the nurses she was her wife. What begins as a lie neither of them corrects, slowly becomes a story about being chosen twice by the same person, and about how the truest things always have to be approached slowly. The nurse called her my wife, and I said yes. That is the whole crime. That is the entire thing I did, at 11 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, in a bed with a rail on one side, with a plastic bracelet on my wrist that had my name spelled wrong. There was a woman standing at the end of the bed, tall, not young, a dark green wax jacket that had been rained on for years, a charcoal jumper under it, white ash blonde hair pulled back into a plait so tight it looked like a decision. She had one hand resting on the metal footboard, and her thumb was pressed hard against a small shiny burn scar at the base of it, the way you press a bruise on purpose. And the nurse, checking something on a screen, said, "Your wife's been here since 6 this morning. Wouldn't sit down." I looked at the woman. The woman looked back at me. She did not blink. She did not nod. She did not in any way help me. There are moments the brain files under useful categories: danger, joke, emergency. This one went into a drawer I did not know I had, and the drawer was labeled "Don't Be Alone." And I heard my own voice come out of my own mouth, dry and cracked and absolutely certain. "Yes," I said, "that's her." Her thumb stopped moving on the scar. That was the first thing I ever learned about Elspeth Rooke, and I learned it before I knew her name. When something lands on her, she goes still, the way a person goes still when a wasp settles on the back of their hand. Quick note before we begin. If you want the hotter, uncensored version of stories like this, I share them on my Patreon, GL After Hours. The link's in the description for whenever you want to stay a little longer inside the story. Let me back up. My name is Poppy Nazari. I was 24. I was 5'1" on a hopeful day, and I had a jet black bob that I cut myself once with kitchen scissors and had been growing out ever since, which meant a fringe permanently in my eyes and a permanent small huff to get it out again. My sister said I sounded like a kettle deciding whether to bother. Here is what I knew when I woke up. I knew my name, I knew my mother's phone number, which is more than most people can say. I knew that I had come north the previous summer with one rucksack, 312 pounds, and a plan so thin you could read a newspaper through it. I knew I had gotten off a coach in a village called Tattersall on the edge of a moor called Hollow, in a week when the rain came sideways and the whole place smelled like wet stone and sheep. And then nothing. 14 months of nothing. Not a fog, not a blur. Nothing. The way a room with no furniture in it is nothing. I reached for Last Christmas and my hand closed on air. The doctor used the word retrograde and drew me a picture, and I nodded seriously at the picture the way you nod at a mechanic. She said the head injury was mild. She said the memories were most likely there, and the road to them was closed, not gone. She said gently that people usually get most of it back, and then, less gently, that some people don't get all of it, and that I should have someone with me for the first few weeks. Someone with me. I had a mother 4 hours south who cried on the phone in a way that made me apologize for being unconscious. I had a sister, Devi, who is a very good person and has 3 children under 6 and a spare room full of a broken treadmill. And I had, standing at the end of the bed with rain still on her shoulders, a stranger who had been there since 6 in the morning and would not sit down. I want to be honest about something because I have had a lot of time to be honest since. I did not say yes because I believed her. I said yes because she had been there since 6 in the morning. They told me about the crash the way you tell someone about weather. A single vehicle, 10 past 5 on a Tuesday morning, in fog, on the lane that comes down off the moor before it meets the main road. My van had gone into a stone wall that had been standing since before anybody's grandmother, and the wall had won, because walls always do. Nobody else involved, nothing to be angry at, just fog, a bend, and me. Where was I going? I asked. The nurse didn't know. Nurses know an enormous amount about your blood and almost nothing about your life. The woman at the end of the bed knew. I understand that now. She stood there in her wet jacket with the answer in her mouth, and what she said instead was, "You had your bag with you." My bag? Both of them. she said. She had a voice like someone reading out a weather warning, flat, careful, entirely without decoration. And she said both of them, and then she pressed her thumb into the scar again and looked at the window. And I did not know enough yet to hear what I was being told. Her name came out in the corridor, from a healthcare assistant with a trolley who called her Mrs. Rooke, which she did not correct either. Elspeth Rooke, 39 years old, kept bees on the moor above Tattersall at a place called Thorny Bank, which was a house, a honey house, 4 fields, an argument with a hillside, and I would learn somewhere between 50 and 90 hives depending on the month and her mood. I want to describe her properly, because I spent the following weeks doing almost nothing else. She was tall in the way that made ceilings look badly planned. Her skin was pale and weather-roughened across the cheekbones, freckled at the nose in a way that suggested a great many summers spent outdoors, refusing hats. Her eyes were flint gray and they did not travel. When she looked at something, she looked at it, completely. And when she was finished, she looked away. Completely. Her hair was that white ash blonde that isn't quite blonde and isn't yet silver, and it lived in one long plait down her back, tied with an elastic band that had clearly come off a bunch of asparagus. She had a pair of reading glasses that spent their entire life pushed up into her hair, and which I never once saw on her face. In the back pocket of her jeans, there was a flat piece of brass with a hooked end, the size of a butter knife, a hive tool. It was there every single day, and by the end of my first week, I could tell her mood from how she was holding it. And at the base of her left thumb, there was a burn scar, old, shiny, about the size of a 5-pence piece. Wax burn, I found out later. She pressed it with the pad of her thumb when she was thinking, the way other people bite the inside of their cheek. That was the beginning of the list. The list got very long. They kept me 2 more days for observation, which is a hospital word for boredom. Elspeth came both days. She arrived at 10 and she left at 6, and in between, she sat in the plastic chair, like a woman waiting for a bus in a country where buses had been abolished. And she said perhaps 40 words a day. I said, at a rough estimate, 9,000. I am a talker. I have always been a talker. My family's position is that I came out talking and merely refined the technique. When I'm nervous, I get funnier and louder and less able to stop. And there is nothing on this earth more nervous-making than a silent, tall woman who might be your wife. So I told her about the food. I told her about the man in the next bay who watched game shows at a volume normally reserved for evacuations. I told her that the physiotherapist had the gentlest hands and the eyes of a woman who has broken a person before. I asked her 19 questions, and she answered 11, and 4 of the answers were yes. On the second afternoon, I ran out of material, which has happened to me twice in my life, and I said, "You're not going to help me at all, are you?" She turned her head. "With what?" "With the part where I'm supposed to know you." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "If I tell you who you are, you'll be who I say." And she went back to looking out the window, and I sat there with my heart going like a moth in a lampshade, because that was, without any question, the most romantic sentence anybody had ever said to me. And I had absolutely no evidence that she'd meant it that way. On the 3rd morning, a doctor signed a form, and a nurse said the word discharge, and everybody looked at me with the specific brightness of people who need a bed. "Is your wife collecting you?" That word again. It kept arriving like a dog with something in its mouth. I said, "I think so." And Elspeth Rooke, who had appeared in the doorway with my coat over her arm and my rucksack in her hand and rain on her shoulders again, said, "I am." And it was the first time she'd used the word out loud, and it landed somewhere below my sternum and stayed there for 11 weeks. The truck was a mud-colored pickup that had once been dark blue and had opinions about hills. She put my rucksack in the back and held the passenger door open, and I climbed up into a seat that had a folded towel on it, and I sat down on the folded towel, and something in my chest went sideways, because the towel was there for the seat spring. I knew that. I did not know how I knew that. I sat down on a towel in a truck I had never seen, and my body arranged itself around a spring my mind had never met. She got in. She did not put the radio on. She reached over, opened the door pocket on my side, and took out a small paper bag of pear drops and set it on the seat between us without a word. I looked at the bag. I looked at her. "Are these mine?" "They're in the truck," she said, which was not an answer, and pulled out onto the road. I ate 4 pear drops in the first 10 minutes of the drive and did not enjoy a single one of them because my hands needed a job. The road out of the town runs along a valley and then stops pretending and goes up. I watched it happen through the window. Hedges gave up and became dry stone walls. Trees gave up and became gorse. And then the whole world opened out into a vast rolling brown-purple thing under a low gray sky, mile after mile of heather in the last week of its flowering. And I made a sound, an actual sound, out loud, like a person who has been shown a magic trick. Elspeth's hand stayed on the wheel, but at the very corner of her mouth there was something that was not quite a movement. "You did that the first time as well," she said. "Did I?" "You said it looked like a bruise. That's a horrible thing to say about a moor." "You meant it kindly," she said. "You said it looked like something that had been hurt and had decided to be purple about it." I stared at the side of her face for what was, in hindsight, an unprofessional amount of time. Here's the thing nobody tells you about losing a year. Everybody assumes the frightening part is the blank. It isn't. The frightening part is that other people are carrying pieces of you around, and you have to take their word for what shape you were. Thorny Bank sat where the last field gave up and the moor took over. A long, low house of dark stone with a slate roof and a chimney that leaned very slightly, as if listening. A yard with a puddle in it that I would come to understand was permanent. A feature, practically a member of the household. A stone outbuilding with a corrugated roof and a wide door. The honey house. Beyond it, running up the slope, rows and rows of white and pale green boxes standing in the wind like a village nobody had told me about. And a collie who came out of the barn at speed, absolutely silent, and then lost her mind entirely 6 feet from the truck. "Mustard," Elspeth said. The dog did not care what Elspeth said. The dog put her front paws on my knees and screamed with joy directly into my face, and her whole back end wagged so hard she kept walking sideways, and she smelled like straw and dog and outdoors, and I burst into tears in the yard of a house I did not remember, holding a dog I did not remember who remembered me completely. Elspeth stood by the truck with my rucksack in her hand and let me do it. She didn't say it's all right. She didn't touch my shoulder. She waited, the way you wait for weather. Then she said, "She sat on the doorstep for 3 nights." And she went inside and left the door open behind her, which I have thought about roughly 900 times since. Now, the door. I want you to understand about the door because the door is where it stopped being a story about a stranger. There was a stone porch. In the porch, there was a bench, and under the bench there were boots. 2 pairs. One enormous pair of green Wellingtons, cracked across the ankle, and 1 pair of yellow ones, size 4, with a mended split down the left side that had been repaired with black tape by somebody who did not care about neatness. On the hook above them, a wax jacket the size of a small tent, and a rust-red boiler suit with the sleeves rolled and pinned to a length that would fit a person exactly my height. And on the shelf, 2 pairs of leather gloves, 1 huge, 1 small. The small ones were broken in, soft at the knuckles, dark at the fingertips, worn by somebody who had used them for months. I stood in the porch of that house holding a pair of gloves that fit my hands perfectly, and I understood in a cold, clean rush that I had lived here. Not visited, lived. My boots had a mend in them. My gloves had my own wear in them. Whatever the truth of the word wife was, I had stood in this porch 100 times, and I could not remember one of them. That first night she made a pan of something with lentils in it, and put a plate in front of me and did not talk while I ate, which turned out to be a kindness and not a coldness, though it took me 2 weeks to learn the difference. The kitchen had a clock on the wall that ran 4 minutes fast. I know that because when I said, "That clock's fast," she said, "Yes," and did not fix it, then or ever. Afterwards, she took my plate and said, "Your room's the back one, top of the stairs left. My room, not our room." I sat with that at the table for a second, and then I said, as lightly as I could manage, "Right, separate rooms, very modern of us." Her hands went still in the sink. "You've had a head injury," she said to the window. "I know." You don't know me. I know that too, I said. That's rather the headline. She dried her hands on a tea towel with a pheasant on it, folded it in half, hung it up, and turned around. And she looked at me completely the way she looked at things. I'm not going to be a story you can't check, she said. Then she said goodnight and went up. I sat in that kitchen alone for a long time listening to a clock that was 4 minutes fast, and I thought, whoever you were, Poppy, you had extraordinary taste.
If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so the next one can find you. Stay close.
The back room had a bed, a chest of drawers, and my handwriting in it. That was the second cold rush. There was a shoebox on the chest with 3 paperbacks and a phone charger and a hairbrush with my hair in it. There was a jumper over the chair that smelled like me, and on the windowsill, held shut by a perished rubber band, there was a notebook, fat, softened, corners waxed and stained brown gold, the kind of notebook that has been in a coat pocket through rain. I opened it and my own handwriting came out to meet me like a stranger putting out a hand. Hive 14, queenless, temper foul, do not go alone. E says smoke is a promise, not a threat. Ask her what that means. Actually don't, she'll do the face. 9 stings today. 9, she said, you're getting slower at running away. I think that was a compliment. It might have been a diagnosis. I read 4 pages and I had to stop, because it is one thing to be told you had a life and quite another to hear yourself being happy in it. The last entry was dated the day before the crash. It was 1 line and it was not funny. Ask her tomorrow. Just ask. I sat on the edge of that bed with my thumb on that line for a very long time. Ask her what? I want to say the next few days were dramatic. They were not. They were mostly cold, and they mostly involved buckets. I woke at 6 because Mustard is a militant. I came down, and Elspeth was already gone into the fields. There was a note on the table in square, upright handwriting, the letters slightly separated, like each one had been considered. Eat something. Don't lift the lid on anything. E. I ate something. I lifted the lid on something. In fairness, it was a saucepan. By the 3rd morning, I had learned the geography of my own house from scratch. The tap that had to be turned twice, the 3rd stair that announced you, the drawer with the string and the batteries and the single dead torch that lived there for reasons nobody had ever examined. I learned them the way a lodger learns them. And every so often, my hands would get somewhere before my head did. I reached for a bowl, and my arm went to the right cupboard, and I stood there with my hand on the door thinking, you're in here somewhere, you absolute coward, come out. On the 4th day, she took me up to the hives. She stopped at the yard gate and looked at me for a long moment and said, you're frightened of them. I'm not. You are. I'm respectful of them. You're frightened of them, she said. Which is correct. You used to be frightened of them and then furious about being frightened, and you'd walk at them like you were going to have a word. And how did that go for me? 9 stings in 1 afternoon, she said. I made a small strangled noise. You've read my notebook. No, she said. I was there. She handed me a veil and the small gloves, and she showed me how to light the smoker with a handful of dry grass and a pinch of hessian, and she said the sentence that I would end up carrying around for the rest of my life. They don't mind you, she said. They mind sudden. Whatever you do up here, slowly. They don't like sudden. Slowly, I repeated. Slowly, she said, and lifted the lid off a hive, and 40,000 bees turned over in the light like water. I would like to report that I was brave. What actually happened is that I stood absolutely rigid with my arms crossed over my chest, like a woman about to be buried by the state, and a bee walked across my veil at eye level, and I said, in a voice I did not recognize, hello, hello, yes, hello. Breathe, Elspeth said. I am breathing. I'm doing loads of breathing. You're doing it at the top. She lifted out a frame. She held it up and the light came through it. And I forgot to be frightened for exactly 4 seconds because it was beautiful, appallingly beautiful. Thousands of small bodies moving over a wall of gold, all of them busy, none of them interested in me at all. Oh, I said. Yes, she said. And I looked at her instead of the frame, and her face had gone open. That was the first time I saw it.
Not a smile?
Elspeth's face didn't do smiles the way other faces did. It did small structural adjustments, but the flint went out of her eyes for a second, and something warm and tired and absolutely besotted took its place. Not besotted with me, with the bees. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I saw that a woman who had said perhaps 400 words to me in 5 days had a whole enormous private room inside her, and the door to it was somewhere in this field. Tattersall is one street, a bridge, a church that opens twice a month, and a shop. The shop is the post office, the newsagent, the greengrocer, the parcel depot, and the seat of government, and it is run by a woman called Billy Trask, who is 72 and has run it since she was 31 and knows the internal financial position of every household in a 9-mile radius. I walked down on my 6th day because I could not sit in that house one more hour with my own handwriting. The bell over the door went, and Billy looked up, and her whole face collapsed into relief and then rearranged itself into fury, in the way of women who have been frightened. "Well," she said. "There she is." "Hello," I said. "I'm afraid I know," she rang. She came round the counter, took both my hands, and held them, and looked at me for a good 5 seconds. "Billy, you buy your custard creams off me and you owe me 80 pence. I'm good for it." "You're not, but I let it go on account of your face." She let go of my hands and went back behind the counter and started doing something violent with a stack of newspapers. "How is she?" "She's quiet." "She's always been quiet." "She's a lot quiet," Billy snorted. And what do you think that is?" I said I didn't know. "Well," said Billy Trask, slapping the newspapers down, "you might ask yourself what a woman does with a mouth she's had to keep shut for 9 years, and then ask yourself whether it's cold or whether it's careful. 9 years. I stood in that shop holding a packet of custard creams I had not decided to buy, and I heard the number 9 land somewhere behind my ribs, and I said, 'What happened 9 years ago?' And Billy looked at me with enormous kindness and said, 'Not mine to say, love,' and rang up the biscuits and charged me the 80 pence. There was one other person at Thorny Bank, Lou Sperry, 19, seasonal, 5'10" of elbows, in a hoodie under her bee suit at all times regardless of temperature, and the possessor of the loudest voice on the moor. Lou had exactly 0 social filtration. "You look better," she said, the first morning she was back. "You looked awful. There was a bit where they didn't know if you'd wake up, and Elle sat in the truck in the car park for 2 days and wouldn't come in the house, and I had to bring her a flask." "Lou," I said. "Lou, tell me everything." "I'm not allowed. Lou." "She said if I gossiped at you, she'd send me home." Lou leaned in with the enormous seriousness of the very young. "But I want you to know I would. That's the main thing. That I would if I could. That is genuinely the least useful loyalty I've ever been offered." "Thank you," said Lou. We fell into a rhythm, the 3 of us and the dog, and here's the shape of a day at the end of a heather summer. Up at 6, tea. Out by 7 while the air is still cold, and the bees are slow and sulky and mostly at home. Lift, check, close. Down at 11 for something on toast. Afternoons in the honey house, the extractor, the settling tanks, the sieve, the jars, the sticky floor, the constant low roar of the machine, and the constant high roar of Lou's opinions. And every day, 3 or 4 times a day, Elspeth would say it, without ever noticing she was saying it. Slowly, slowly with the lid, slowly with the frame, slowly past the entrance. Don't stand in their road. Slowly with the smoker. A puff, not a cloud. Smoke is a promise, not a threat, which turned out to mean that smoke tells a colony there's a fire somewhere, and they should think about home and food rather than about you, and that if you use too much, you have not calmed them. You have lied to them. I wrote that down in the notebook, in the new pages, in handwriting that was mine but shakier than the old pages, which was its own small grief. And every night I read 3 pages of the old me, and went to bed with my heart going. Here's what my own notebook told me about the woman I was living with, in her own words and mine. E doesn't eat before 10. Says the day should have something in it first. E hates the word beekeeper. Says you don't keep them, you host them and take rent. E stood in the rain for 40 minutes because a swarm settled on Meecher's gatepost, and she wouldn't leave until she could box them. Meecher was rude about it. She was polite about it. I was not polite about it. She said, "You don't have to fight everyone." I said, "I know," and I lied, hand under my elbow going over the style. Every time. Every single time. She doesn't know she does it. I read that last one on my 9th night at Thorny Bank and put the notebook down and stared at the ceiling and thought, oh no, Poppy, you were in love with her. And I want to be very clear about what happened next, because it is the most ridiculous part of this entire story. I got jealous of myself. There was a woman who had lived here for 14 months and learned the fields and mended her own boot and worn those gloves, often got 9 stings in an afternoon, and written hand under my elbow, every single time in a notebook. And I was not her. I had her hands and her fringe and her terrible sense of humor and none of her memories. And she had spent a year being loved by proximity by a tall, quiet woman who put a folded towel on a seat for her. And she had not had the decency to leave me a single one of those days. I sat on the 3rd stair at 1 a.m, being furious with a woman who was me, and Mustard came and sat on my feet, and I said, "You liked her better, didn't you?" And the dog leaned her whole weight against my shins, which I have decided to interpret generously. The first week of September brought 2 things, the last of the heather and Gilbert Rannoch. The heather comes off the moor in the first fortnight of September, or it doesn't come off at all. Heather honey doesn't behave like other honey. It sets like a jelly in the comb. It won't spin out in an ordinary extractor. You have to press it or prick every single cell, and it is the reason people come up that lane with money in September, and the reason Thorny Bank survived at all. Elspeth had 80 hives up on the Hallow that year on somebody else's land, which is how it has always worked up there. The moor belongs to an estate. The estate lets the hives on for a fee and a nod, and everybody has behaved this way since before the war. Gilbert Rannoch was the estate's new land agent. He drove a very clean car up a very dirty lane and stood in the yard in shoes that had never met a field and said the word portfolio twice. I watched from the honey house door. He said the estate was reviewing its agreements. He said there was interest in the moor from a shooting syndicate. He said that the current arrangement was, and I quote, historic rather than commercial, and that if the hives were to stay past the end of the season, there would need to be a proper lease at a proper figure, and he named the figure. Elspeth stood there with her hive tool in her hand and did not move for 4 seconds. Then she said, "You'll want that in writing." "Of course." "Then write it," she said, and went back into the honey house, and the conversation was over. And Gilbert Rannoch stood in the yard in his shoes with a puddle 2 feet from him, thinking about what to do with his face. Lou breathed out, "He's a plum." "What's the figure?" I asked. Elspeth said, without turning around, "More than we have, we." She did not notice she'd said it. I noticed. I noticed the way you notice a step that isn't there. That night she went out to the truck after dark, and I watched her from the landing window, and she did not go anywhere. She sat in the driver's seat in the yard with the door open and 1 boot on the gravel, and she looked up the hill at 80 white boxes in the dark for the better part of an hour. I went down. I put the kettle on because I am British and useless, and when she came in, I said, "Tell me about the lease." "It's not your problem." "Elspeth, you've been out of hospital 11 days, and you've been carrying this for 11 days on a diet of tea and grievance," I said. "Sit down. I'm going to be extremely irritating about it. It's what I'm for." And she stood in the doorway with the cold coming off her jacket, and she looked at me for a long moment. Then she pulled out the chair and sat down. It took us until 2 a.m. She got out a shoebox. This family keeps everything in shoeboxes, with 9 years of paper in it. And I found out that Elspeth Rooke kept her accounts the way a person keeps a diary they're ashamed of, honestly, badly, and in pencil. And somewhere around midnight, I stopped being a woman with a head injury and became a woman with a spreadsheet. Because it turned out my hands knew this too. I'd done books before. 2 years for a fruit farm, 1 for a garage, and it came out of my fingers like a song you can play but can't hum. "You're fast," she said, watching. "I'm cheap and I'm fast. It's my whole personality." I tap the page. You're underselling the heather by about a third. It's what people pay. It's what these people pay. These 4 names buy 11 jars a year each. And one of them is Billy, who I love. But Elspeth, this is the only heather honey for 40 miles, and you are selling it out of a shed to a man called Meacher who was rude to you about a swarm. She pressed her thumb into the burn scar. So what would you do? She said. And I told her. For an hour and 10 minutes I told her, and she listened the way she listens, completely. And she asked 4 questions, and each one was the correct question. And at the end of it, she sat back and looked at the papers on the table and said something that went straight through me like a wire. That's what you said in March. I went very still. I said this before? You wrote it out, she said. On the back of a feed order. I've got it in the drawer. And what did you do about it? Elspeth Rooke looked at the table. Nothing, she said. The fragments started on the 14th day. They did not arrive as memories. They arrived as facts I already had. I opened the door of the honey house and knew, before my hand was off the latch, that the hinge would drop a 1/4 inch and you have to lift as you pull. I heard Elspeth's boots on gravel from the other side of the barn, and my whole body turned toward the sound like a plant. And once, this one frightened me, Lou shouted something across the yard and I laughed and said, "That's what you said about the tractor!" And then stood there in the wind with my mouth open, because I had absolutely no idea what I meant, and Lou was staring at me. And I had made a joke out of a Tuesday I could not attend. I told the doctor about it on the phone. She said this was good. She said it was extremely common, and I should keep going and not force it. I said, how do I not force it? She said, live your life. It comes back sideways. Sideways, right. Everything up here came sideways. The rain, the memory, the woman. The village decided we were married, and the village was very happy about it. That was the part I had not planned for. A man outside the shop shook my hand and said he was glad I was on my feet. A woman at the church gate said she'd put us on the prayer list, both of us, by name. Somebody left a tin of flapjack on the wall by the gate with a note that said, for Poppy and Elspeth. No surname, no explanation. The way you leave things for people who belong to a place. And I did not correct any of them. Not one. I told myself it was because correcting them was complicated. That was a lie. I did not correct them because every time somebody said it, your wife, the pair of you, you two, something in my chest sat up like a dog at a door. I did watch her, though. Every time it happened in front of her, I watched her. She never smiled. She never played along. She just went very slightly still, the way she had at the end of the hospital bed, and pressed her thumb into the scar and let it go past her. By the 3rd week, we were pressing heather 10 hours a day, and the whole house smelled like a warm church. That is the closest I can get to it. Heather honey smells of smoke and toffee and something almost medicinal underneath, and it gets into your hair and your sleeves and the back of your throat. And by the end of September, I could not smell it anymore, which is the saddest sentence in this story. We worked. That's what happened between us for 3 weeks. We worked, shoulder to shoulder, in a stone room with a bad light and a machine that made conversation impossible unless you shouted, and the shouting made everything easier. You can say things at volume that you cannot say quietly. Why bees? I shouted, on about the 9th day of it. Because they don't want anything from me, she shouted back. That's the bleakest thing anyone's ever said in a shed. And she laughed. It was 1 syllable. It was practically an accident. It came out of her like something falling off a shelf, and she looked as surprised as I did. And I stood there with a jar in each hand, and I thought, I would take this job for the rest of my life for that noise. She put her hand under my elbow at the stile. I had read it in my own handwriting, and I had thought I was ready for it. And then it happened. The second field, the wall, the awkward 2-step over, and her hand arrived under my arm without being asked and steadied me and was gone again in a second and a half. And my ears went hot, and I nearly walked into a gorse bush. She had no idea she'd done it. She was already 3 steps ahead talking about wax moth, every time, every single time. The old me had written it down because the old me had also clearly lost her entire mind about it. At the end of September, we took the honey to the county show, which is the biggest thing that happens in that valley all year, and I set up a stall. Not Elspeth's usual arrangement, which was 2 crates and a shoebox for change, and an expression that dared people to approach. I did a proper table. Brown paper, one string of little lights, the jars in a stepped row from pale to dark, a slate with the prices in chalk, and, my masterstroke, a saucer of the heather with a stack of teaspoons because nobody on this earth walks past a free spoon. We sold out in 4 hours. All of it. The pale, the dark, the last of the summer flower, the 24 jars of the heather at the price I had set, which was more than a third above what she'd ever asked, and not one single person blinked. I found her at the back of the tent afterwards holding the empty crate. "You'll want to say something," I said. "I'm thinking." "Take your time." "I'm not enjoying this at all." She set the crate down. She looked at the trestle table and the string of lights and the chalk slate, and then at me, and she said, "Nobody's ever done anything for this place that wasn't work." That was work. That was hours of work. I've got glitter glue on my Poppy. She said my name, just the name on its own, with nothing after it, in that flat, careful voice, and the whole tent went quiet, even though there were 400 people in it. "You made it look like something someone loved," she said. And then she picked up the crate and walked out to the truck, because that is the absolute limit of what Elspeth Rooke could do in one afternoon. That night, we drove home in the dark with the empty crates rattling and the heater making its noise, and neither of us said anything for 11 miles. And it was the most comfortable I had been in my own skin since I woke up in that hospital. Somewhere past the turn, she said, "There's a frost coming." "Is that bad?" "It's the end," she said. "Once the moor frosts, they've nothing left up there. Everything comes down off the hallow to the home fields before the first hard one, or they starve on the hill." "How long have we got?" She looked at the sky through the windscreen the way other people look at a clock. 10 days, she said. Maybe 12. 10 days to move 80 hives down a moor, and a land agent with a lease in the post. You've reached the part where wanting turns into something more. If you want the hotter, uncensored GL scenes, they're on my Patreon, GL After Hours. Details in the description. Now, back to Poppy, who was about to find out that some doors only open in bad weather. The storm came in on the 2nd of October, 3 days before we were due to start moving hives, and it took the roof off the far end of the honey house at 9:30 at night. Not the whole roof. 4 sheets of corrugated iron off the low end, which peeled up with a sound like the sky being opened with a tin key. And by the time we got out there with torches, the rain was going in sideways onto 200 jars, the settling tank, and every empty super she owned. We were out there 90 minutes. I will not pretend I was useful for all 90. I was useful for about 70. And then I was cold in a way I have never been before or since. And my hands stopped working properly. And I stood holding one end of a tarpaulin in a gale, with rain running down inside my collar, and I started laughing, because there was nothing else available. "What?" she shouted. "We're going to lose," I shouted back. "We're going to lose to a shed." "We're not losing." "Elspeth, the shed is winning!" And she got the last strap over the edge and hauled it down, and it held, and the noise stopped. And we stood in the doorway of a wrecked stone building in the pitch dark with the rain hammering the tarpaulin above us. And we were both breathing like we'd run somewhere. She turned her torch off. "Come inside," she said. "You're shaking. The kitchen light was too yellow after all that dark." She put the kettle on the hot plate, and I stood dripping onto the flagstones with my arms wrapped around myself, and she came back with a towel and stopped about a foot away and held it out. And I did not take it. I looked up at her. She had rain on her face, and her plait had come apart down one side, and there was a bit of hay stuck to her jumper, and her eyes were doing that thing where they do not travel. "Ask me something," I said. "What?" "Anything. I've been asking you questions for a month. You've never asked me one." Her thumb moved against the burn scar. "Once." "All right," she said. "Are you happy here?" Out of everything she could have chosen. "Yes," I said. "You don't remember choosing it?" "No." "Then how do you know?" And I said, "And I have never in my life been more sure of anything, before or since, because I keep choosing it every morning, and I've got nothing to go on but you." The towel was still between us. She took one step and closed the foot of air, and she put her hand along my jaw with her thumb just under my ear, and she waited there for a second, which was the longest second of my entire life. She was giving me room. She was doing what she does to anything living, approaching slowly so as not to frighten it. I said, "Slowly," and she kissed me. It was not careful. That is the thing I want on the record. Everything about that woman was careful and that kiss was not, and her hand went into my wet hair and mine closed on the front of her jumper, and the kettle boiled itself dry on the hot plate behind us, and neither of us did one single thing about it. When we stopped, she rested her forehead against mine and did not let go. 14 months, she said, very quietly. I have wanted to do that for 14 months. And I laughed with my eyes shut, and I said, well, that's the bit I've missed, which is, I now understand, one of the 2 or 3 most unfortunate things I have ever said out loud. She was gone before 6. I came down into a kitchen with a note on the table in square, upright letters, "Gone up to the Hallow. Don't come, wind's bad. E." And a clock 4 minutes fast, and a kettle that had been scoured and put back on the shelf. Lou found me in the honey house at 9, standing in the wreckage with a broom I had not moved in 20 minutes. "You two had a row," she said, with enormous satisfaction. "We did not have a row." "You had a something." "We had a storm," I said. "Half the roof's in the top field." Lou looked at the roof. Lou looked at me. Lou, who was 19 and had the emotional radar of a bat, said, "Right," and started sweeping, and did not bring it up again, which was the kindest thing anybody did for me that week. She came in at dusk, ate standing up, and said 11 words to me, and 4 of them were about the weather. The next day was the same, and the next. I would like to tell you I confronted her immediately. What actually happened is that I turned into a woman I did not recognize, careful, quiet, watching a face for weather, doing the thing where you make yourself smaller in a room so that the other person has space to come back to you. I understood something in those 3 days that I have never entirely put down. Being loved by someone who cannot say it is not a puzzle. It is a weather system. You start planning your whole day around a sky. It came back on the 6th of October at 10 past 4 in the morning, and it came back all at once. I was asleep, and then I was not asleep, and I was sitting bolt upright in the back bedroom with my hands over my mouth because I was in the kitchen. Not this kitchen, the same kitchen, 14 months of Tuesdays ago, at the end of a night that had gone on too long. The show, the crates, the empty bottles of something Billy had pressed on us, the 2 of us at that table at 4 in the morning with the clock running 4 minutes fast, and me saying it. I don't want to go home for the winter, and her not saying anything. Elspeth, I'm asking you, tell me to stay. And Elspeth Rooke, in the yellow kitchen light, with her thumb pressed white against the burn scar at the base of her hand, looking at the table and saying, in that flat, careful voice, "You should go before the roads get bad." I remembered standing up. I remembered my chair going over, and me picking it up because even then I was tidy about my own humiliation. I remembered packing in the dark and being unable to find the charger and crying about the charger, specifically the charger. I remembered 2 bags, both of them, she'd said in the hospital, both of them, and the yard and the smell of frost coming and fog on the lane like something laid down over the road on purpose. And then nothing. That part never came back. The last 4 minutes of it belonged to the wall. I sat in the dark for an hour and a half with all of it in my hands. Then I went downstairs, and she was already up, standing at the window in the dark with a cup she wasn't drinking, because of course she was. I said, "I asked you to tell me to stay." The cup went down on the sill. "And you said I should go before the roads got bad." She did not turn around. "Yes," she said. "I want you to know that I did not shout. I have shouted at a great many people in my life. I once shouted at a man in a car park for 11 minutes about a trolley. And in the kitchen of Thorny Bank at 5:30 in the morning, with the whole of it back in my head and my chest full of broken glass, I found that I could not get above a whisper. "Why?" She turned around then. She looked absolutely gray. "Because you were 24. she said, because you'd come here with a rucksack and no plan, and you were the best thing that had walked up that lane in 9 years, and if I said stay, you'd have stayed. That was the whole trouble. You'd have stayed because I said it. That's what people do, Elspeth. That's what the word's for. And in 5 years, you'd have been 30 on a hill with no neighbors and a woman who can't talk, she said. I've done that to somebody before. There it was, 9 years. Her name was Sari. 6 years. They had married in the church that opens twice a month in February, with 14 people and Billy doing the flowers. And it had ended not in a row, but in a slow silence, the way a house cools. And the last thing Sari had said to her, standing in that porch with the boots under the bench, was, I have spent 6 years lip-reading you. She wasn't cruel about it, Elspeth said. That's the worst of it. She was fair. She stood there and she was completely fair. And she said, I can't spend the rest of my life guessing. And she was right. And I let her go without saying one word to stop her. Why? Because I couldn't think of one fast enough, she said. And then it was 2 years later. I stood there in that kitchen with my arms wrapped around myself. So when I asked you, I said, you decided for me. Yes, you decided that I'd be better off in a city with my mother than on a hill with you. Yes. And then I drove into a wall. And Elspeth Rooke, who had not flinched at a land agent or a roof coming off or 80,000 insects or a burn that left a scar the size of a coin, put her hand flat on the table to hold herself up. Yes, she said. I made myself ask the last one. And at the hospital, she looked at me. They said family only, she said. 6 o'clock in the morning, and a girl behind a desk said, Are you family? And I said, She stopped. Her jaw worked. I said, I'm her wife. Why? Because it was the only word that would open the door, she said, and because it was the only word I had never been able to say to you. And it came out of me at a desk to a stranger at 6 in the morning, and I have hated myself for it every day since. The clock on the wall ticked, 4 minutes ahead of everybody. You let me say it too, I said. You stood there, and you let me say yes. I know. You could have told me. Any day. Any one of 30 days. I know. Then why? And she said, and this is the sentence I would carry down off that hill and all the way to a city and back again. Because for 4 weeks, I got to find out what it would have been like if I'd said it. I left the next morning. I want to be honest about that too, because I have heard people tell this kind of story as though the leaving is the villain's part. It wasn't. I left because I was 24, and I had just got my whole life handed back to me in one piece at 4 in the morning, and every single thing in that house, the boots, the gloves, the towel on the seat, the second cup, was a thing I had earned in a year I could now remember earning, and I could not stand in the middle of it and think straight. She drove me to the coach. That is the part that undoes me even now. She got up at 5 and put my rucksack in the back and put the paper bag of pear drops in my coat pocket without a word and drove me 22 miles to a bus stop outside a garage and stood there in the dark in her wax jacket while I got on. She didn't say stay. Again. But when the coach pulled out, I looked back and she was still standing there in the wet orange light of the garage forecourt, with her hands at her sides, not waving, just watching the way you watch weather you have no say in. My sister lives on the 4th floor of a block in a city where the buses are so frequent that people complain about them. Devi took one look at me in her doorway and did not ask a single question, which is how I know she is a better person than I am. She put me on the sofa bed. She gave me the youngest one to hold, on the grounds that a baby is an excellent excuse not to talk. And on the second night, she sat down on the end of the sofa bed with 2 glasses of wine and said, Right, who is she? I said, It's very complicated. Devi said, It's a woman on a hill, and you've come back smelling of smoke. It is not complicated. It's just far away. I stayed 11 days. I had a phone that worked and a body that was healing and a city with 400,000 people in it. And I have never in my life been so completely, so specifically in the wrong place. Do you know what does it? Not the big things. Nobody stands on a fourth-floor balcony in the rain thinking about dry stone walls. It's that you go to make tea at 6:30 and there is no dog leaning on your shins. It's that your hands come up in the supermarket to check the weight of a jar, and there is no jar. It's that somebody says the word frost on the radio, and your whole chest goes cold for reasons the person next to you cannot possibly follow. I got a text from Lou on the 4th day. She won't say anything about anything. Mustard sleeps on your boots. This is not gossip, because I have not said anything. I got one from Billy on the 7th, and Billy does not do texts, so it had clearly taken her about an hour. Frost forecast Thursday, 80 hives still on the top. She is doing it on her own. I thought you would want to know that. B, 80 hives on the top. They go down in the dark, in pairs, strapped and blocked, 2 people lifting each one, because a full hive in October is the weight of a person, and you cannot carry one alone across a moor in the dark without dropping it. And a dropped hive at 4 degrees in October is 80,000 dead. She was doing it alone, in 4 days, at night, on that hill. I stood in my sister's kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I made a sound. And Devi said, "Go on then." And I said, "The coach doesn't run till Thursday." There was a knock on the door at 8 o'clock the next evening. I was on the floor with a 2-year-old and half a plastic farm. Devi answered it, and I heard my sister say, in a completely new voice, "Oh," and then, "You'd best come in." And Elspeth Rooke stood in the doorway of a 4th-floor flat in a city 4 hours south of her own weather, in her wax jacket, with rain on her shoulders and a brass hive tool in her back pocket, because she had not thought about it, and her boots absolutely filthy on my sister's landing. The 2-year-old stared up at her, awed, and said, "Big." "Yes," said Elspeth. We went down to the car park, because there was nowhere else. 4th floor, 3 children, 1 sofa bed. The most romantic setting available to us on this earth was a car park under a security light with a puddle in it, and honestly, at this point, that felt correct. She stood by the truck. She didn't lean on it. She stood the way she stands. "The frost is Thursday," she said. "I know. Billy told me." "Billy should mind her shop." She looked at her hands. "That's not why I came." "Elspeth." "Let me do it," she said. "Please. I've been 3 days getting it in order, and if you talk, I'll lose it." So I shut up, which took every single thing I have. She got the words out slowly, not fluently. She had to stop twice, and the second time it went on so long that a man came out for a cigarette and went back in again. "I've been quiet my whole life," she said. "My father was quiet. This valley is quiet." And I told myself it was manners, and then I told myself it was character. And after Carrie, I told myself it was a kindness, that a woman who can't say things ought to have the decency not to hold anybody still. The security light clicked off. Neither of us moved, so it stayed off, and we finished the whole thing in the dark, which I think helped her enormously. "And then you came up that lane," she said, "and you talked for 14 months. You talked at breakfast, you talked at the hives, you talked to the dog, and I thought, I'll just keep her near the noise. I'll say nothing and I'll keep her near it. And it worked, and I let it work, and then you sat in my kitchen and asked me for one word, and I would not give it to you, and you drove into a wall in the fog. And I sat in a car park for 2 days, and I could not think of one single thing I had ever actually said to you." "Elspeth, so here it is," she said. "I want you to stay. I have wanted you to stay since the 2nd week, when you rehung my gate the wrong way round and argued with me about it for an hour. I don't want you near the noise. I want you across the table from me making it. And if you'd rather have a life where somebody says things easily, then take it, because you should have that. But I'm not going to be quiet about it anymore and pretend that's me being kind. I was never being kind. I was being frightened." The security light came back on because a car came in, and she was standing there absolutely rigid with her jaw set, waiting to be told the answer she had already decided she deserved. "You drove 4 hours," I said. "Yes. 4 days before a frost, with 80 hives on the top." "Yes." "Elspeth Rooke, you left 80 hives on a moor to come and stand in a car park in Leeds." 91, she said. "I split 2 in August." And I started laughing. And then I was not laughing, and she crossed the 2 yards of wet tarmac, and I got a fistful of that wax jacket and pulled, and she came immediately, the way she never came when you asked her with words. "Say the other thing," I said into her collar. "Which?" "The one you said to a girl at a desk at 6 in the morning. She put her hand along my jaw, thumb under my ear, exactly where she'd put it in the kitchen with the storm going. And she said it properly this time, out loud. To me, in a car park, with the light on. We drove north through the night and got to Thorny Bank at 2:20 in the morning, and there were lights on all over the hill. I thought it was a fire. I actually said, "Elspeth, the hill's on fire." And she stopped the truck in the middle of the lane and got out and stood there with the door open. It was torches. Billy Trask had shut the shop at 4 and rung 19 people. There were headlamps and hand torches, and one absolutely useless bicycle lamp moving in pairs across the top field, and the flatbed from the farm at Meecher's, driven by Meecher, who had been rude about a swarm, and who had brought his son and his son's girlfriend and 4 straps. Lou was shouting instructions at grown men. The vicar was there in a fleece. Somebody's teenager was sitting on the tailgate holding a flask like it was a job. 61 hives down already, and the frost was still 2 days out. Elspeth stood in the lane and did not say anything for a long moment, and I looked up and her face had gone open, the way it had gone open over a frame of bees in September. And this time, it was not for the bees. Billy came down the field with a torch under her chin, like a woman about to tell a ghost story, and said, "You'll want to get that truck out of the road." And Elspeth said, "Billy." And Billy said, "Don't. I've had nothing to eat since 2 and I'll go off." And turned round and went back up the hill, wiping her face on her sleeve. We got the last 30 down over the following night, the 2 of us and Lou and Meecher's son. It is the hardest work I have ever done. You go up in the dark with the entrances blocked and you lift, and the whole box hums against your chest like something enormous being annoyed in its sleep. And you walk 200 yards down a slope. You cannot see with another woman's hands on the other end, and you match her step without either of you saying a word about it. At 4 in the morning, we put the last one down in the home field and stood there with our arms shaking. The frost came the following night. It went over that moor and took everything, and by the morning the hallow was silver and dead and gorgeous and completely empty of us. The lease got settled in November, and I would like to say that we beat him, but what actually happened is more boring and much better. I wrote it out again. Not on the back of a feed order this time. Properly, 11 pages, with the numbers of the county show in it and the price we had proved people would pay, and a projection for 120 hives split over 2 sites. And then I did the thing Elspeth would never do in 9 years of pencil. I sent it to the estate, directly, over Gilbert Rannick's head, to a woman on a board who had a name and an email address, and it turned out a childhood in that valley. Thorny Bank now has a 15-year lease on the Hallow, at a figure that is more than we were paying, and considerably less than the shooting syndicate offered, because the estate would rather have a heather crop and a name people know than 9 men in tweed for 4 weekends. Gilbert Rannick has been moved to a different portfolio. I have chosen to feel nothing about this. My memory came back in pieces over that winter, and then most of the way, and then stopped. I got the first summer back. I got the swarm on Meecher's gatepost and the 9 stings, and the gate I hung the wrong way round, and Christmas, which we spent with Billy because neither of us can cook a bird. I got the whole long, unbearable second spring where I decided I was being ridiculous and would definitely be over it by June. I never got the crash. Those last 4 minutes belong to the wall, and they can keep them. And there is one more thing I never got back, which the doctor says I probably never had. The moment in the fog when I decided. Whether I was going home, whether I was going to sit in a bus station for 6 hours and then turn round and come back up that lane and say it again, louder. I have decided it was that one. I have no evidence I am allowed. In February, I found the notebook again, in the drawer with the string, and the batteries and the dead torch. I sat on the 3rd stair, which is the stair that announces you, and I read all of it from the beginning. The queenless hive, the smoke that is a promise, the hand under my elbow at the stile, every single one. and I got to the last page, the day before the fog, and the one line I had left myself. Ask her tomorrow. Just ask. She was at the table doing the accounts in pencil, badly. I said, Elspeth. She said, Do you want me to stay? And she put the pencil down straight away, immediately, no pause at all, the way you answer a question you have been sitting on for a year and a half with your hand up. Stay, she said. We were married in the church that opens twice a month in the following February, with 22 people in it and Billy doing the flowers. I know, believe me, the number of jokes available about a woman who spent 4 weeks lying about being someone's wife and then went and did it on purpose. I have made all of them. I made several during the service. Lou had to be spoken to. Elspeth wore a charcoal suit that was 10 years old and cost more than the truck, and her hair down, which about 4 people on this earth have ever seen. Mustard sat in the front pew and behaved for 11 minutes. And the vicar said the word wife out loud in a stone building in front of everybody. And I watched her face do the thing it does when something lands on it, go still. Except this time she did not press her thumb into the scar. This time she reached over and took my hand instead, right there in front of the whole valley, which for Elspeth Rooke is the equivalent of standing on the roof and shouting. Here is the last of it. It is late April, and the first proper warm day, and we are up in the home field because a colony has decided to swarm. And swarming is the one thing bees do that nobody can talk them out of. They are up in the air over our heads, 30,000 of them. A great slow spiral of noise and light. And it is the loudest thing you have ever heard, and completely harmless. And they settle in a hanging brown bundle on the low branch of the hawthorn, like a beard on the face of the world. I am holding the box. I am wearing the gloves. My gloves. The small ones, soft at the knuckles, worn dark at the fingertips by a woman who was me before I could remember being her, and which I have now worn soft all over again. And Elspeth is standing at my shoulder saying nothing, because she does not have to say it anymore, because I know. I put my hands up under the branch anyway. Slowly, I say. And she says, slowly, and shakes the branch. And 30,000 bees drop into the box in one soft, heavy weight, like something being given. Afterwards, in the field, with the box on the grass and the stragglers coming home to it, she puts her hand along my jaw with her thumb just under my ear, and waits there. She always waits there. She will wait there for the rest of my life. I am the one who closes it, slowly.